This is a 1991 Alfa Romeo Sprint Zagato, a 3-litre wedge-shaped weapon. And the looks are somewhat polarising, but this is Alfa Romeo making a statement. And that statement was, we're back in a big way. Oh yeah, that is a beautiful sound.
Fiat had bought Alfa a few years before the arrival of the SZ, and in a spirited drive to revitalise the brand, hired the Italian coach builder Zagato. A limited production run of only 1,000 cars, the SZ Coupe was built on the basis of a traditional rear-wheel drive 75 saloon. The car would be revealed in the 1989 Geneva Motor Show as the ES30, a name that on paper looks far too similar to oil giant Esso. Thankfully then, when it was launched, it was known to all as the Sprint Zagato. Whilst it proudly wears the Zagato badge, it was designed at Fiat and Alfa and put together at Zagato.
The styling of this car is purposeful, to say the least, and is quite like anything else that was designed at the time. It's a design that quite literally jumped off the drawing board before the engineers and executives had any chance to change it. It's aggressive and has hard, blunt features, but is apparently quite aerodynamic and has a drag coefficient of 0.30, which I'm told is quite good for a car of its size. The nose of the car in itself is a statement of intent with its 6 headlights poking out the front, but then your eyes are immediately drawn elsewhere. Things like these high raised wing mirrors that's kind of reminiscent of a 288 GTO. And then we've got the contrasting black roofline here, which really sort of accentuates the cockpit of the car. A couple of other things to note here as well. It's the windscreen, the way that kind of curves. You've got this wonderful sort of curvature, almost like the cockpit of an aeroplane. So lots of things going on here. Now, interestingly about these deep dish alloys is that you can't see the brakes. You normally see calipers just behind the alloy, but actually the brakes on this are inboard, so they're mounted directly to the chassis rather than being at the end of the wheel there. The clutch and the gearbox are also housed at the rear, so you get great weight distribution. Then around the back of the car, we've got this razor sharp carbon spoiler, which looks epic, but when you're sat in the driver's seat, actually obscures the view from behind you. So not ideal, but looks absolutely brilliant. Right, the boot, or lack thereof. Slightly strange hinging from here. Normally boots come from the bottom, but this comes from the top. Of course, it's Italian. Open it up, and it is absolutely tiny in there. You don't get anything else other than the spare tyre. That is obviously a smaller spare tyre than the one that sits normally on the car. So if you do have a puncture, the absurdity of the whole thing is that you can't actually then get back the wheel that you've taken off in there. So the only other option is pop it behind the seats where you've got plenty of space there. That is if you haven't got any luggage. Otherwise, you're rather stuffed really, aren't you?
The car was a bit of an experimental mongrel in truth, one that turned out well, but isn't without some perplexing design decisions such as the fake bonnet vents. They look cool, but functionally pointless as they're sealed up. And then you've got the lightweight aluminium roof and possibly the world's heaviest bonnet. It just doesn't make any sense, and yet it still draws you in.
The interior is actually a very pleasant surprise and very welcome from all the exterior madness that's going on. And these seats have got these massive bolsters that really hug you in. They're actually quite high onto the rib cage. The next thing that you know is actually how low the roofline is. I'm only about 5'8", and I actually feel, quite big in this car, particularly when I put the seat forward into my driving position. Driving along, nearly scuffing my head there. So actually headroom isn't great, but you sort of soon get quite used to the driving position. It's quirky, but fun. A couple of other things that you kind of immediately notice. Back in 1991, this was actually quite an expensive car, probably around £40,000. And on the second-hand market, they were trading way in excess of that. And so you look at the interior fittings, and on the whole it feels quite luxurious until you look down at the gear lever, which sort of feels a little bit like something out of a Ford Sierra of the time. Not that that's particularly much of a problem, as many Alfa drivers have probably been nowhere near a Ford product. Other nice touches in the cabin is that we've got this little plaque here denoting that this was number 441 of the limited run of these cars. The headrests have also got the rather tasteful Zagato design debossed into the seats, in case you needed any other reminder that this was a special limited run car. And then behind you, there aren't actually any seats to the back of the car, but there is a very, very generous load space for luggage and these rather cool canvas luggage straps. No problem for luggage on a grand tour in this thing. Sadly, you don't see many of these out on the road today, and that's because most of them are probably squirreled away in collections. You're more likely to see a barn owl than spot one of these on a nice spring day like this. Right, let's give her a little tickle. Oh, yes. It's not crazy power, but it's plentiful. It just sings along. It just loves to rev, this thing. It's only about 210 brake horsepower, but I tell you what, that is plenty around here. Now, one of the very cool things about this car is actually you can adjust the ride height. There's a button on the inside here. So at the moment, the car's running high, but if I press this button, this green button here, the car starts to drop. And that is a super cool feature for 1991. The nose goes down and then the rear dips down. The trickery comes from Coney dampers with adjustable suspension mounts, which means if you need to change the ride height, you can do at the touch of the button. The stiffness remains the same, but if the going gets a bit hard, you can just flick the switch and off you go. The cockpit layout's very cool as well. It's very, very traditional, sort of feels like a early 80s Ferrari in a way. The speedometer, rev counter, clock in the center there. And then we've got the amps of the battery, the oil, water temperature and fuel, which is dangerously low at the moment, so I need to go and put a few quid in it. They say you're not a true car guy until you've owned an Alfa, and there's plenty of choice. You could go a bit Mrs. Robinson on it, or you can get a new Quadrifoglio, and neither of those two would be a bad choice. But for me, this wedge-shaped weapon, as I call it, is the one. For some, it's a bit like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. But I love the design, and when it comes on song, it's really hard to beat. Now look, here's the thing. If you've always wanted a 911, then I get that. But the Alfa SZ is a bit more distinctive. It's discerning. It's the irregular choice. And whilst it's experimental, it's still a great driver's car. It's a talking piece. And to put it quite simply, it's bloody brilliant. This Alfa Sprint Zagato has recently been consigned with Collecting Cars. So head over to the website collectingcars.com to check out the full listing and all the other consigned cars that are live on the site now. Thanks for watching and see you soon.